multiply the seed.log with yosemite, or we send it to Porty.
Okay, folks, let's settle down. David, Jason, everyone. We're about to start. I'm happy to introduce Doug Jones. Doug is a linguist by training, BA/MA from Stanford in linguistics, I believe, phonology, MIT PhD in Hindi syntax. And then he did a little short stunt at the AI lab and at UMIAX before going on to work for our friendly government down the street at Fort Meade for several years. Then he went up to Lincoln Labs, where he's now as part of the, I don't know the name of the group. It's the
Information Systems Technology, but my part's the speech group.
Okay, the speech group. And he came to our attention, of course we knew him even when he was here, but more interestingly, he's lately been working on basically how useful it is to produce transcriptions of speech of variable quality, what people actually do with it. And that's, we thought, was interesting, and we wanted you to hear about it. That's why he's here today. And he's going to talk about machine translation evaluation based on DoD standards. And maybe you'll mention some of the speech work, or?
I can in passing.
Okay, all right. So, Doug Jones.
Thanks. It's a privilege to be here. I saw the lineup of speakers before me, and it's a little intimidating. But this is a good place to be. I think this talk will be a little different than some of the others as well. There are people in the room who are going to know a lot about this already, I think. But what we want to do, I think it's important in your positions as well, from time to take stock of how the technology and the ideas that you're developing relate to ways you can measure their utility outside your technical field. And language is a special case a little bit. I've had the good fortune of talking with a number of students before, and I think this department maybe is unusual, but people have a strong language background. Almost everybody in the room had some language exposure or another, and that colors your intuitions. People know language is hard if they had to learn a foreign language the hard way in school, and people, because of that, there are all kinds of tests for measuring people's proficiency. Because when you learn a language in school, you need to know how well you're doing, and the government also needs to know for various reasons how well people are doing. I mentioned Wade Shen on here. Some of you may know him, but we've worked in partnership on this, and I wanted to acknowledge that in the outset, that this is a lot of people worked on this in particular. Wade, the outline. I'll spend a little bit of time mentioning some of the motivations and some of our collaborators, our colleagues on this work. And then we'll get through, we want to look at what people who teach foreign languages to people, how can those yardsticks be accommodated to measure the technology? And we'll step through the standard military test. It's used in various parts of DoD, the services, the armed services, the intelligence agencies, this kind of thing, the defense language proficiency test. It's a high-stakes, career-making kind of test. It's like passing the bar. If you're going to want to be a lawyer, you have to pass this test. And we'll look at how you can use this test as a way to measure machine translation utility. Basic ideas: if you pass the test, you can get a sense of how good the MT is. And once we get through that, you'll get a sense of the methodology and how it works. And we'll go to another experiment where we take all of the experiments on the first part are based on text input on this test that the Defense Language Institute built for us. We'll look at an audio experiment where the translation comes in audio format and it's more corrupted, and you do less well on the test. The motivation for this part of the work came from DARPA. Although I mentioned some of the ancient history, over the conversation before started with some people I had met when I was at NSA at Defense Language Institute to develop the government standards, these metrics. The main so we had been working on that at Lincoln for a while. So we had a foundation to respond to a call from DARPA to look at this time the TIDES program. There was a real breakthrough in the program. Everybody saw this, and between 2002 2003, the quality just jumped up. And in large part, we believe this, a lot of people have said it, it's due to the quality measure that Kishore Papanyemi, Salim Rukos and their colleagues developed at IBM. I think a lot of you already know about the BLUE scores. it's not only measured the progress, we believe it enabled it. People knew how to, they had the hill to climb, and they climbed that hill. And so there was you can really look at a before and after picture, 2002, 2003. There was a breakthrough. And I want to step through some examples. You'll get some, if you haven't seen them already, some intuitions about that. David?
I mean, I think the Arabic is particularly startling, but people can correct me if I'm wrong, but there was definitely discontinuity between 2002 and 2003 in the amount of Arabic news data that was available to train on.
That's a good point. So there are reasons, and it's good to get insights into that, into the reasons why. And that's a very, let's come back to that. That's a very important comment and astute in a variety of ways. We want to be able to do that without always just getting more data, too. But that's a comment upon a comment. Michelle?
They also have, and it's a similar thing to what Dave said, did they also have humans looking at the output in 2003?
Well, for this they did. They had humans looking all the way through at LDC, the 2000.
I thought in 2002 they just had the little, in 2003 they had the little plus.
Well, I just measured the blue scores here. So I mean, there's different ways you can maybe post, after the fact analyze it. Even just looking at the blue scores, maybe more simple than what you're thinking about. You can see a quality jump, and you can measure it. You'll get intuitions about it, but then we want to see how can we relate that to a government standard. Part of it, there is a scientific element to the work. We would like to know what are the skills that the test is designed to elicit so that you could see those. There's also a programmatic side to it. It helps if the technology investment can be motivated outside the research community to other people. There may be competing needs for budgets, that kind of thing. And if you can motivate it to more people, there's that side of it too, a programmatic side.
Let me make another comment, which
Yes.
is that, suppose we hadn't had blue.
Yeah.
Then the question is, with all the Arabic data available, would somebody still have looked at, for example, the examples that you're about to show us and say, wow, there has been a quantum jump in the technology?
That's a good question.
And I think that the answer to that is yes. But on the other hand, it is actually enabled by blue, because what happened is when people got all this data, they had something concrete to optimize. So
That's right.
in some sense it played into it.
And it even goes more with the discriminative training and stuff, which you guys know about that. But I think Sanjeev is right. I think that if you don't have intuitions, you will in short order. If you look at the translation on the left and on the right, the green one and the blue one. The one on the left, the green one, you can read it, it's short. An official announced today in the Egyptian Lines Company for Flying Tuesday as a company inconsistent for flying may resume the consideration of a day Wednesday tomorrow. Her trips to Libya of Security Council decision trace internationally imposed ban comment. The words are all kind of right, but they're jumbled up. And you know what it's about, but you don't know quite what it says. Following the decision of the Security Council to suspend the embargo imposed on Libya, now the words have come together and you can start to get facts. So the fact is what I wanted to, it's not just the words. You can tell what's going on. That leap, I think Sanjeev is right. I think that people would have noticed this. They would have noticed.
Whose translation engine is it?
This one? Kevin's.
The one.
Actually, all the way through.
Both of them?
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, his in 2002 and in 2004. We should, when we get to the end, we'll try to give thanks to for all the people who helped. This is a case where it really took a village. I mean, Kevin, and I should not just Kevin. A lot of people there worked on that, but it's the ISI system. Now, for comparison, the human translation, an Egypt Air official announced on Tuesday that Egypt Air will resume its flight to Libya, so on and so forth. This is. I think here it's not necessary, but it's a mini tutorial on how blue works. I think everybody here probably already knows. But what it does is you count up the number of words. Well, we say grams because the punctuation counts, so it's just easier to say 1 gram, 2 grams, 3 grams, and 4 grams. And so there's a table at the bottom that shows how many of these were counted in 2002 versus 2004. And there's more of each. And you can see you saw the jump in the score before. In the aggregate for the TIDES evaluation, it's also reflected in these examples. And this is the basis of the blue scores. And to some people, I think here this seems natural. For people outside the field, I think of conversations we had at the Defense Language Institute early on where this seemed very unfamiliar. The idea that you would count matches in a translation without looking at the source, it dumbfounded people that I wouldn't look at the Arabic and measuring the quality. That can be as it is. I mean, I think that it's a driver and it's important. And this is how the blue score is measured. Again, I think people know about this. I just mentioned there's a little more to it. I don't want to, you saw a tabulation before. There's more to it. There's a length penalty, so that you don't game the system. And it's a harmonic mean for longer words. I think you probably know that, or we can get into it later if need be. But the point being, It's quick, it's easy to compute, it's a Perl script you can send around in an email attachment. There are several varieties. Keyshore has another one that has a confidence measure, I believe, inside. It revolutionized, I think, how people thought of MT quality. And I don't know if it's necessary to say this, but the stuff I'm going to talk about on the human evaluation I see as independent and orthogonal. Both are necessary. I would hate for somebody to think that I would somehow want to replace this. I think this is driving the research. I think it's good. I think the human subjects I'm going to talk about are a different thing, and it's orthogonal. However, that being said, it doesn't answer every question. I can't just look at this and say, what does a blue score of 0.5 mean practically? I would break out champagne if I got 0.6 blue on all this. We would all understand that. But outside this community, you wouldn't be able to answer what it's useful for just because of that. I reread the IEPI report cover to cover. I was aware of the general impetus of what that meant, but I hadn't. It's amazing what's in there. I think that there
are many people who don't know what the IEPI report.
The IEPI report. It was written in '65. It was John Pierce, wasn't it? The AT&T chaired this. It's all on tape. Well, it interrupted machine translation research. It made it sound like it wasn't a good idea to invest in machine translation research, and there wasn't much in the country, in the United States, for a good decade or so. I think that, and things were different then, the translation, the systems, everything. But what wasn't answered was a utility question. What would it be good for? And we'd like not to be, there could be many ways of answering this question. I wouldn't presume that this is the only one. But I think that in general, it's good to have answers like this. Pick anything you want to say what it's useful for, and this is one kind of an answer. And so I think it's important to look through. I'm going to say a little bit more about who we work with, and for people who haven't heard. Some people have seen this pretty much all. I feel bad about that. But the Defense Language Institute, their mission is to produce operationally proficient military linguists. And their function is mostly SIGINT. We learned that recently, signals intelligence. So it's mostly not so interactive. The courses are tailored to that. It's the largest institution of its type in the world. 3,000 some odd students and residents, over 1,000 faculty, 26 languages there. If you learned Arabic and you didn't learn it from your parents and you're American, you probably learned it in Monterey. They have the testing procedures, and they're the gatekeepers for evaluating language proficiency for the services and the agencies. So we wanted to find out, how do they measure people? They're not all the same. They don't all, you have to have a method of telling when somebody's able to do a job, that kind of thing. So this is who we went to for the test. I mentioned before, it's a high-stakes test. It's like when you want to be a lawyer, you want to pass the bar. You want to get flip pay, you have to get past level 3. It's the standard pay kind of scale for doing this kind of work. This is just a cartoon version of what, there's a whole literature on this. You can go on the web, I can give you references on the Interagency Language Roundtable. In its time, it was kind of a revolution by focusing on proficiency rather than grammatical constructions you might have learned in school or demonstrating sort of just basic knowledge. It was proficiency to do tasks. If you can think about the HR nightmare it would be to go through like military-wide or government-wide and say, for each job, how can I tell if somebody can do this job? You have to abstract away from that somehow. And for ones that involve foreign language work, this test is what was the answer to that. So the cartoon version on the levels, like I said, there's a whole literature, 30 years of work on this. Level 1 is kind of basic survival skills. And I listed an example. You can find names. You can get around basic life. By the way, I should mention, each one of these has reading, writing, speaking, and listening skills. So you can abstract away for each of those. Level 2, you can get the basic facts. So you think of Newswire text as showing facts. You can understand that. Level 3, you have to start to read between the lines, understand inferences. You start to need cultural knowledge, that kind of thing. And the level 3 is the goal for, it's a military goal. So what we wanted to do is take this test and adapt it to the machine translation. And it's real simple. You just take an Arabic test, a DLPT test, and you just drop in, instead of reading Arabic, you're going to read machine-translated Arabic into English. And that was it. And we constructed a reference translation. We outsourced this to 4 different translation houses for the Arabic. We adjudicated this, made a very high-quality English translation. We would give this test to human subjects in the 2 forms. So you could contrast with pretty much what we would call perfect English, as perfect as we could make it, versus the machine translation. And the idea is that better MT means a better score on the test. And your baseline would be, how well would you do if it were English? And that's kind of it. And so the rest is details on how we implemented this and how we got through it. I wanted to give some props to we worked with Ted Gibson and people in the psycholinguistics lab at MIT. This is a part I won't say so much about. Actually, one of the students have a question like, what won't you talk about during your talk? And so we spent an hour kind of talking, the people who were there around the table, about some of the ears work we did on transcript readability. And I felt like it was really important for us to understand how you do these tests, how you have statistical significance, and how to set this up. And we learned a lot from Ted and his colleagues there. I want to at least acknowledge that. The test itself, like we say, that came from the Defense Language Institute, although we used Ted's subject pool, among others. Now, some people have seen this example. I thought of swapping in a new one, but since the examples were key to it, I didn't want to mess anything up. So this will give you the look and feel of it. There will be a number of people in the room who can. How many people can read the Arabic? There's always at least 3 or 4 people. All right. Oh, okay. So I'm sure you can answer it by the Arabic. What's the purpose of this article, and what message does the staff add? Some people answer that question without knowing any Arabic. It kind of amazed me at first, but it makes a point. People can try to answer. Go ahead. Somebody.
What's the question?
What is the purpose of this article?
This article.
Yeah. And some people answer it correctly just by looking at that with no knowledge of Arabic.
To announce a wedding.
Yeah. Okay. Did you got it from just looking at that?
I don't read Arabic. That's what
Yeah. So the shape.
It was based on the format from the fact that it says it's in our society section,
Yeah.
and the fact that you said that some people can get it.
Yeah. So there's some clues there. That was one I should have thought more about. But the point being, there's no hard and fast break between what you know just from general life experience and your language knowledge. You'd like to think there is, because of Chomsky and stuff maybe, that there's one part that's grammatical and one part that's everything else, but it's really hard to make that break. And people can look at, and you say, well, is it fair? I told you it's in the society section. Maybe you would have known that. So it's worth making a point. It's come up a couple of times, and I think it's worth thinking about. Yeah, I wouldn't bet on it that everybody can do that. They might be wrong, but the idea that somebody might do it. Think about that, because there's an example of this. What message does the staff add? You'd be hard pressed. Maybe you can do it. David would be more likely. He knows some Arabic. You'll get it now. This is the machine translation. It's kind of stilted a little bit, but you'll see there at the end. It's sincere congratulations and wishes them happiness. Kind of it's just a language model error, I guess. But you get the answer right. You put that well wishing there. You got it, and people get it. They get this answer right. Reading the machine translation. This is level 1. It's simple stuff. It's just basic. I can read through the classified ads. I can't necessarily get a lot of facts necessarily, but
Who
yeah.
wrote this? This is a machine translation.
This is a machine translation of this.
Again, Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin's.
I see, and it has twice happened.
I know. I don't know why it did it. Maybe we could analyze that. The one thing
It's not what you
I said more when we were at the Foreign Service Institute. It's an artifact. It's a distraction, to be honest. The thing that I don't think here it would be a big deal. At the Foreign Service Institute, we had to emphasize that we didn't expose a live DLPT because they're very expensive to build. $500,000 to make one of these tests. Yeah, sure.
I'm wondering whether the word happiness is actually repeated.
No, it's not. That's why it's kind of I should. And the
what were you
people.
saying about a live DLPT test?
It's not a lot. We had the good fortune of having the principal architects of the DLPT test make a brand new one. So I wanted to kind of mention that.
So they made a version of the test for you.
Yes.
And you gave it to people where all of the Arabic text or whatever the foreign languages were replaced by machine translation.
Yeah.
And you saw how well the humans did.
That's right.
And you gave it to how many humans?
A couple hundred. We ran several experiments. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I started to count. I was going to get the count because I thought somebody might ask. It was at least 500-600.
Yeah.
But with the ears one and this one. This one, at least a couple hundred probably by the time we did all the experiments. We run them in batches. We had overkill in the number of subjects just because we wanted to make sure we had enough. We had statistical significance with far fewer than we would have run like 80 subjects. We would have probably, we could have done.
And did you also run a control group that had access to the real Arabic? And given that the test wasn't live,
we required for our purposes that we required that to be college that. We're governed by the institutional review boards. We had to be careful about how we got the subjects and what we told them and stuff like that. People self-reported being comfortable reading college-level text and pretty much would say, I'm from
Sorry, that's not what I meant. I meant, how do you rule out
Well, let me finish.
Go ahead.
We required that they not know any Arabic. So your contrast of they wouldn't, if you put the Arabic in front of them, they're going to get nothing.
Not my question. You said that this wasn't a live test. Suppose somebody came and said well, you know, they had somebody write them a new test, but it was a much easier test than...
That's a valid question. Some of the level 3 questions need to be improved, and we know that. That's a reasonable question.
So you didn't actually test, see how Arabic speakers did that?
Arabic speakers that's one thing I was asking for people, I mean, especially for the students, to think of what might we do next.
Yeah.
Do the test with native Arabic speakers would be one. We haven't done that.
Or dialect.
We experimented in the classroom with Arabic learners.
Yeah.
We learned we should do the test differently next time. We didn't report on this one anywhere, but for a bunch of reasons. Excuse me. So we didn't. So that those would be some ones that would be interesting to do. Like so, native, maybe even full bilinguals could do it. But come back to that. See if it factors in much in a little bit. I skipped one because there was a reason for this. Why I skipped to level 3. Because the first example I showed was level 2, so I thought it would be kind of redundant to do a level 2 one. So I'm skipping to level 3. You just have to remember that the one with the suspending flights to Egypt or wherever it was. This is a level 3 one. You don't have to read the whole thing, but you can see it's pretty hard to read. A foreign minister's statement. Just think about why does the author consider the minister's remark dangerous for the Iraqi government? And it doesn't just spell it out. You have to think about it. If you have to read all of this, the jumble of words, it's pretty hard. And level 3, you have to read between the lines, make inferences, that kind of thing. People generally failed on this one. So that's just for you to have intuitions about what a level 3 text looks like. Complicated editorial. So this is the experiment we ran. I said 69 subjects. There were actually 84. We kicked some out because they failed. We had a screening question to try to control for people who would at least have some world knowledge, and so that mattered. It's a detail I can get into if somebody wants to know more. It was a Latin square design, so people would see. Every passage would be seen by every subject, but only in one condition. We measured their reaction time and their accuracy. And the DLPT test has an accuracy threshold of 70%. There's a whole literature about why it's that, and a debate about details on that we learned a little bit about. This is the main, I should take stock of the time. I guess it's okay. This is the main result. I'm sorry, I'm missing I forgot to fix this slide. The bars on the right, the light colored ones, are the accuracy aggregated over the subject pool when they read, you can figure it out, when they read the English translation, or the professional quality one. The dark bars on the left are when they read machine translation. And the passing threshold was 70%. So they passed level 1, they passed level 2, and they failed to pass level 3. We got a certain amount of grief over why they didn't get 100% on level 3. But so we actually, we talked to the people at ETS who do the GREs and asked them to look at our materials. And their assessment is that it's basically GRE level stuff at level 3. Not everybody gets a perfect score on the GREs. So they're not, just because it's perfect English doesn't mean you're going to get a perfect score. That's just the nature of that level. It's much more difficult, even in your native language. It's almost kind of a conceit, I think, left over maybe from the AI days, that if it's human level, then it's when the machine reaches that's perfect. But it doesn't mean that people are perfect. It's just something to think about. I thought, yes, this mentions the proficiency, the levels of proficiency to do certain tasks. So level 1 would be like, can you find the names, basic survival skills. Level 2, the basic facts. And level 3, reading between the lines. So if there's any questions about that should be asked. The rest is details on this. The first slide on the left you've seen before. Now, the upper right-hand corner is the number of subjects who passed the test.
Go back to the previous one. I had a question.
Yeah, well, it's on the upper left-hand corner.
Okay, all right. So my question is, so this the standard DLPT test that they have.
Yeah.
They are required to get a score of 70% in terms of the translations that they produce, or in terms
They don't have to
of
produce
answer?
translations.
So they never produce translation. They only answer questions.
Yes.
Okay.
That's also a very astute question, because that asks the question, what is the role of translation in the job? Not every job that would require foreign language skills would require translation.
Okay.
unless you handed that to somebody else who had to do the job.
So all you're doing is you're saying, okay, let them do the same task, and we'll give them either perfect translations or crummy translations.
Yeah. And for our pilot one that we didn't really report on or make a big deal of, but we asked the score, when the people who were, this test had to be hand scored. And so the scorers, we asked them to, we required for them not to know the condition of the material. So in some cases it was Arabic learners in the classroom. In some cases they were reading machine translation. In some cases they were reading human translation. They didn't know. So they scored the test as if they were Arabic learners. Nothing special for us. We felt that was important to make it as double blind as we could, just to go by those standards. The upper right-hand corner, I think, is fascinating to me. It's the number of people who passed. And so, like I say, the ones on the right, the light-colored ones, that's reading human translation. It didn't make a percentage on this. I'm not sure what that would mean exactly. You can make it mean whatever you want, I guess. But 12 people passed level 3. So I thought that was pretty interesting. What was special about them? Yeah, Michelle?
Yeah, that's what I'm questioning.
Well, we don't know. We don't know. We would like to know. Maybe their DLAB scored. That would be interesting. You know, there's a pre-test for in the military, at least, when you learn a language at DLI, you have to pass the Defense Language Aptitude Battery. Certain score, I think it's 130. I don't know. It's a kind of an artificial language test, but it tests your ability to learn languages. And so you don't get to take Arabic unless you get a really good score on that. I'd be curious, what's special about these 12 people? Maybe they're just lucky, you know? I don't know, you answered that question. Could you be lucky all the time? You know, and answer them enough? That's an unknown, we don't have an answer to that.
Well, they might just be very good at deciphering empty output.
Then that would be good, because maybe there's skills that people have that we could teach, that we could detect and say, all right, we wanted to say level 3 should be the goal, you know? Well, the question is framed in such a way that it's you're trying to enable people to do something.
Well,
I mean, one experiment to run would be to take Arabic learners and have them see if they're better at deciphering the empty output.
That's what we want to do. That's on the plate.
Right.
That's what we want to do. We want to say, let's take somebody who's had a little bit of Arabic, and we could say a whole year, maybe a few weeks, and then do this. So you don't go in naive, and maybe give them both. Give them the Arabic and give them the,
Right.
you know, open it up. Give them anything.
Say forceful.
Give them a dictionary too. You know, I mean, why? You know, there's no reason to limit yourself, but those would be some of the questions we'd like to look at. That's a natural one.
there's another line of experiments that comes to mind, although this might be hard to do in practice. It might be that even though the stuff is hard to read because it's not English and you're not used to reading it, that the information really is there, as evidenced by the people who passed it. What if people didn't have to read it blind, but were allowed to mess around with it in a word processor to get it into shape before answering the question? What if you actually made that a separate task? So you have some people whose job it is to improve the fluency of the empty output.
That's you made me. I mean,
so they do well if the people who that more fluent output is passed on to are able to pass the test.
That's an interesting idea.
But they don't know what the question is when they're making the output more fluent.
You could do that. I thought that my colleagues talked me out of this idea kind of along those lines. I was like, what if you worked in buddies? Like you had 2 people and like one person could. The thing is, this test, it takes about 4 hours if you're not that fast to do it. It's fatiguing. You get so tired of it. It's like if somebody were kind of clean it up for you and you kind of work it together as a puzzle. I don't know. Those are good questions. The lower left-hand question, just slide. Those are the blue scores. You can see that the human translation blue scores are always better, but that's not the main factor. I mean, it's just not as clean as we'd like. It's not just nicely correlated with everything else.
So that's 1 against 3. You had 4 translations.
Yeah.
Average
3. We had to use 3 because for the human translation we had to save 1 out. So we outsourced 4 translations, but we kept 3 of them for the blue scoring.
You didn't just go out there.
Well, we could have outsourced 5. Well, we wanted to hit. Well, there's another. I know. There's an experiment I've suppressed in this because I didn't ever like it. But we had one other condition, which was called future machine translation, where we interleaved the human translation with the machine translation. And because we did that, we had to segregate some of the reference translations so that you wouldn't get an accidental leg up from that. But that's ancient. I mean, I already forgot. The reading times, that might surprise you if you're able to see what the legend says. It's seconds per word. So that's lower is faster. So then the question is, why are they reading the hard stuff faster? mean, that's a natural question. And we asked people, we had exit interviews, we'd ask some questions, and we made ourselves take the test, so we also had our own intuitions. People skim. If it's long, even if you didn't go to Kaplan's, training center, you kind of know, look at the question and then go up and find the answer and skim and then answer the question. And the level 3 ones are long enough, it's like a page and a half of stuff. And so you find the question and skim through, and when you get the answer, you write the answer. For the level 1 ones, they're short enough that you don't really do that. That's our best explanation for that. So it's 2 different skills. We've seen that in other experiments. This would fall under the category of things I guess I won't talk about so much, about skimming versus careful reading. See, Terry's here. We have some other companion experiments where we've looked at those kind of differences, and it's good to know what people are doing. This is just the fun part now. So you've seen the basic motivation, you've seen an experiment, and so kind of went all the way through that. And we looked at another, the motivation for this, the next set of experiments was for ears, because part of the DARPA ears program was producing Arabic words from audio. So we wondered, well, what's good enough? Well, what's it good for? What can you do with that? Well, we had an easy answer for that. We'd say, well, take the Arabic words and then feed them into machine translation, see if you can pass the test. And so we did this next experiment. You might have intuitions, you might not. You will probably when you see the output. But you can see what we're trying to do and how we would frame the question, how we'd know what the answer looks like. And so this is the one part where I want you to listen. I had some feedback from here before, so I turned that down. Some people will be able to answer this from the audio.
منعت أجهزة الأمن المصرية في مطار القاهرة الممثلة المصرية المعتزلة صابرين من السفر إلى المملكة العربية السعودية بصحبة زوجها طارق جلال محمود.
Okay. So there's actually a lot you could learn, I think, from listening to that, if you listen carefully, about the question, why did Sabrine have to change her travel plans? I mean, it's a stretch, but did you get anything at all?
Saudi Arabia.
You heard that. That was the thing to hear. So you'll know, okay, at least maybe it's on topic. Did you hear her name? Sabrine? So if you heard her name, you might know it's on topic. That's probably about it, unless you know some Arabic. But at least you know something. There's some words in there that match part of the question. It turns out it's not. The answer won't involve Saudi Arabia. It's not your fault. But this is what the audio MT output looked like. The Middle East had prevented Egyptian security bodies at Cairo airport. Mutazalites. I don't know. You hear the Saudi Arabia. Could you answer the question? Pretty much nobody can answer this based on this. This isn't enough. It's not enough to go on. People surprise me. Maybe you can answer. You'd probably get an answer. Who said something? Yeah.
Yes.
What was your full answer? Go ahead.
Security issues.
I don't think you'd pass. I think the key was stronger than that. It depends on the answer key. They stopped her from leaving. You might. Security forces stopped her from leaving Egypt. You might get that. Now, would you get it if you had the text MT? I think so. By the way, Sabrine, I guess it's kind of like, it means steadfast, is what I'm told. So it's kind of it's a name that has a meaning, which names often do.
So that name got translated here.
Yeah. So you would. Security forces prevented at Cairo airport. You'd probably get the answer. So by now you should have the intuition. You fell below the bar for level 2. Didn't quite enable you to pass on the aggregate. Level 3 is kind of perverse, I guess. We ran it too, and just saw how bad it would be. That had 56% performance accuracy on audio MT, and they still passed level 2. Level 3, of course, they didn't pass either one. We didn't expect they would because they didn't pass level 3 on the text. But that was a baseline. I've moved pretty quickly through. I don't know if this is good or bad, but I wanted to. This is a general framework for measuring the utility. You can imagine you have audio coming in, or it can be foreign language text. You convert this to English. You have if it's a job that's worth building technology around. There's already somebody doing that particular job. There's a human baseline you can look at as a performance, whether it's translation, transcription, whatever it is. And then you can look at native English speakers looking at the output from these different processes and try to quantify that effect according to some threshold. And the rest is variations on this. I mentioned we've run upwards of 500 subjects in different experiments mostly for DARPA ears, DARPA tides, and kind of these pre-Gale studies. on this question. I think the rest is just it's some conclusions. Some people we need to thank. I'm not sure the list is long enough. It's been a collaborative effort with a lot of people that be at the Brain and Cognitive Science Department at MIT and also Defense Language Institute. Osseila El-Khatib and Husni Ibrahim did the scoring. A lot of people there did a lot of work under very tight deadlines. I think the thing about the test, I've mentioned more in just conversation. You can think of us kind of having a national foreign language deficit in a sense. We have what, 250 million people, not all monolingual, but there's a lot to keep up with. And what are you going to do? You can invest in the technology, the research, these kind of answers, machine translation kinds of answers. You can train people, but it takes a long time. Maybe there should be some kind of mix. But what we're trying to do is have a yardstick that would say, whatever you've done here, whether you've trained a person or you've given the machine translation or any kind of technology or both, can you tell if you've made a dent in that? And I think this test is something that helps with that from the foreign language point of view. Specific conclusions, we've repeated this a couple times, and we have the significance. We believe we've demonstrated that current state-of-the-art machine translation enables the level 2 skills. We've been kind of chastised for saying you pass level 2 because that you can sweep a lot under the rug with that. We don't really want to say that. We kind of look at the skills that are involved in level 2 and say that we've enabled those as measured by this test. We think that level 3 is a good goal for Arabic. I think it makes you think about some questions. First of all, right now we haven't achieved that on the aggregate, but if you think ahead and say, imagine that translation is so good that you can read the Arabic, the newspaper article, the complicated one, it's perfectly fluent, everything. You're still going to miss something. You are. You're going to miss details. You're not going to know that about that part of the world. You'll not know something about that country. What are the things that should be in arm's reach that you should be able to read to fully understand that passage? And we talked about this in the break, a number of us around the table, the student meeting. There are lots of precedents for this. Maybe there should be kind of companion search programs that have pre-looked for complicated things. You might need to know specific cultural knowledge. Those would be things around the corner. Maybe you try to think, how does this affect you right now? I don't know that it does affect what you do for algorithm development. Maybe there are specific skills if you go, and I would encourage you to look at the skill set, the Interagency Language Roundtable skills. If you wanted to target technology towards specific ones, that might affect what you do. But for overall, you have in my opinion, a pretty good hill to climb with Blue and maybe companion-related measures. You want to improve that. You know that's good. Maybe every once in a while you take stock and you see where things are. I wouldn't presume to put this in competition with that. I think they're very different kinds of measures. I think the other specific thing we've learned is that the audio-based MT, the way we set it up, I think I mentioned in passing this was under very tight deadlines. We passed files around the country. BBN, it's the audio processing. We sent this out to ISI for the MT. You can imagine doing a much more tightly coupled machine translation experiment where you're going to get better output. I think the measure is fine. You might find that you passed or come closer to passing. But it being as it is with the propagation of errors, they didn't pass level 2 on this. So we feel that the yardstick is serviceable. We feel like it lets us talk with people. It opens up conversations. If you know that people are doing jobs that required level 1, level 2, level 3 skills, then the inference is that with the machine translation, you can do those jobs. So that's the open question. We haven't demonstrated that with this. That's a leap of faith. And so that's one thing that would be nice to find out. And there are other, there are examples of, I think, machine translation being deployed very successfully. I think many people in the room have heard Francis Kubala's and his colleagues at BBN, and I guess other people with their the DTER experiment, Darpatide's Iraq Reconstruction Report experiment. It's a very, very successful deployment of machine translation. I would take that as an example that it was useful. But look at other specifics and run subjects, I think, are a good thing. I guess from here on, I tried to cover it in 45 minutes because you can only sit so long. And so I'm not sure how long people want to sit, but that's the basic thing. Sure.
So
yeah.
Let's say you do text-based MT. Do you know how well you can do with the MT system from 2002?
No. That would be a nice test. It's hard for people to mothball their systems. This, I don't know if people have. It would be an interesting experiment. Maybe I should just say no and leave it at that. We don't know. If we wanted to find out, you could imagine ways of trying. You could try to make a comparable system with the, see the specifications that team used to build that system, try to build something comparable and see if it matches. If that were an important enough question, you could do that. But we have not.
You could do something else. You could take a current system but train it with. I guess the question you're getting after is, like, at a blue score of 0.42 or whatever it is, you pass level 2.
Is that what you wanted to know?
Yeah, what blue score would you not pass it?
The problem is we're not
for another language, and then
you could do that, but we already tried to look at correlations. They're very weak. I had them. I don't remember them right now. I just remember they're not interesting. The problem is that the test itself, by design, and I'm not sure that we might want to rethink parts of this. The way they do these tests for humans, for people, the language learners, is that when they construct the test, they look at the most important parts that they expect the person to understand. So that's fraught. That means we have a hard problem because the machine translation, the blue score doesn't. It's a distraction of what it does on everything else. We only care about the part that was important, but the machine doesn't know it was important. So it's not a very sensitive test that way. The reason I alluded to, if we wanted to rethink that, we could imagine asking more questions throughout the text if we wanted to. We might get a closer correlation with blue if we knew, if it had been corrupted severely on this particular sentence, and we had a bad blue score there, maybe something like that. But I would not expect an easy correlation between blue and this, and that's not an easy problem to fix. Yeah.
I have two questions. So the first one is, what's your projection of Chinese when you do instead of Arabic? The second one is the audio transcriber performance, or like Euler-Lagrange or something like that. Which system is from BBN or from?
We used BBN system. They were able to do the work quickly. I wouldn't want to take this as a comment that somebody else's system was better or worse. I mean, we felt like theirs was very good, but others might also have had a good system. It was driven by necessity and a timeline. The answer to the Chinese one, I don't know right now. My gut feeling is that it's going to be comparable. This test itself is not that sensitive. I wouldn't want to use this test the way we have it to compare two systems with each other, or even one system in a very short period of time. I think of it kind of like maybe once a year you put a mark on the wall to see how tall your kid is. She's taller this year. It's kind of like, to me, it's that kind of a test. I think it's appropriate for state of the art, maybe on a periodic basis. So when I look at the Chinese, if I kind of ask myself, am I getting the basic facts by reading the translation? It kind of seems like it. Do I get to read between the lines and understand the nuances? I don't feel like that so much. And so just based on that, I would expect it to be comparable. But one of the things we'd like to do is maybe build a test and conduct that experiment. So that's something that obviously came up in our thinking. It took a long time just to build this one and to work out all the kinks. There's like a half dozen experiments I didn't talk about because they were like along the way when we were learning how to do it, and how we adapted from the more purely psycholinguistic test platform that we used on the other experiments. We had to do a lot of adaptation, and we didn't want to do that with two full tests at once, and so we just focused on one. Fred?
What do you think of the measure that Tether wants to employ? Maybe I should say it, but you can say what it is.
Okay. That's a hard question in this.
Does everybody know what I'm talking about?
No, they don't. You should tell them.
Did you take the whole thing?
Okay.
No, it's okay. You're in an academic institution. You're free to speak your mind.
Well,
so should I tell
please,
them?
please. That would help. That would help me.
Well, allegedly, it will take the output of the machine translation and measure the smallest number, essentially the Levenshtein distance between that and a sentence that makes sense and is fluent.
But except the one catch was it allows groups of words to move.
Yes, that's true. Right. Okay.
So edit distance.
But the point is that there is not a, I mean, my point at least is that there is not a standard sentence into which you have to transform it. It's sort of up to the personal transforms.
So in other words, for every hypothesis, there is a nearest useful English translation. So if you think of all possible English word strings, then any string that you could put out, in its neighborhood, there is a good string. And you measure its distance.
I'll say a little more. I think I can say a little more.
Human translation of that sentence.
Well, what Michelle said is right, and that's very important. Do you want to say more?
Yeah, there's a difference. I gave a talk, unfortunately, to this group about an edit, well, not this group, but a small group that was interested in me and allowed me to talk about a project I was doing. And we did do that. We moved around words in output to form a sentence that made sense. But we didn't compare it to a human translation of that sentence.
Did or did not?
Did not.
Yeah.
This is a crucial difference in what I present to a group here and what is being done in Dartmouth now.
Yeah, I mean, I
what
think
they want to do. Yeah.
I think, I mean, though this
I just
one.
learned that yesterday.
Okay.
They have a human translation, and they're going to compare the output to the human translation and just edit distance.
That's right.
Yeah.
Did you say? Maybe Fred said that. I'm not sure. Part of the way the process, the way I understand it, is you will look a person, either a full bilingual, probably not, or a native English speaker is going to look at machine translation and a trusted, perfect, let's say perfect, reference translation.
Right.
Well, let's say that it's as perfect as we can make it.
Excuse me, I don't understand it the way you're saying it. I don't understand, I mean, my understanding is that there is no prescribed human translation.
Then that's not true.
The person who does the movement creates.
No, that's not correct.
What do you mean? Last year, like they were saying, even that they've sent like the same sentence to 3 different agencies or 4, and what they got back is that when they were looking at the different translations, they didn't even get like a really high agreement between them.
Which part are you talking about?
Like the fact that like
You were.
Okay, let me.
Yeah.
I want to.
Yeah.
What Fred? I think. Okay, what Fred said. There's a part which it is true. What it is true for the calculation.
Yeah.
What you said is true for the calculation.
Yes.
For the creation, there's a separate step, which is to the side of the machine translation. There's a trusted, perfect reference translation, and but that's important because if you don't have that, you don't know what it was supposed to say.
I know, but you still don't have it. Okay, I am asking you a question what you feel, but I'm telling you what you should do. So I should, shut up.
Well, part of the thing is I don't think it's negotiable. I think that's the thing in terms of the measure.
All right, this man has money, so it's not negotiable, but that's not what I'm asking.
I think
I'm asking whether you think that this is as reliable as the Bloom score, actually.
I don't think we know enough about it. I think the first order of business is to find out if two people can agree. There's two measures of agreement. One is there's a strong one and there's a weak one. The strong one would be if I have two people presented with the same machine translation and the same reference translation, will they make the same edits? I don't think that will happen.
Exactly.
That's the strong one. The weak one, will they have the same error rate? Maybe that would be good enough. I don't know. Let's say that happened, if the strong one happened, and okay, then you can start to do some things like Mark Lieberman has started to do. Maybe you've done this too. Yeah, you can start to demonstrate correlations with blue. And if you do that, then you have the same hill. And if then it's fine. You don't worry about it. Now, we haven't seen it yet. I think that the first order of business is that these experiments have to be conducted. Maybe try the strong one. If the strong one works, then that will. And if people agree more than you thought they would, maybe the guidelines can be tightened up so they agree well enough. If they don't, do they agree on the error number? That you don't feel as good about. But if it correlates with the blue, then you feel a little better. And so we just don't have
it. Of course you feel good about the blue.
That's right. And then you can, and then you know what to do. I don't know what other. Yes.
But there is a fundamental flaw in this metric that I feel. So for example, you say that, okay, the way it's going to be evaluated is I'm going to sit down and I'm going to take an Arabic sentence about which I know absolutely nothing. I'm going to take a trusted English translation. I'm going to sort of internalize its meaning because that's what I really am after.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to look at this machine translation output and start playing with it until I get a reasonable sentence. Meaning it doesn't have to be completely grammatical, it can be missing things. And then I have to convince myself, had I read this sentence, I would have gotten the same meaning that I now already have given that I've already read that sentence. Now let's go to a real operational scenario. There is no real sentence.
Yeah.
Right? Knowing that editing it a little bit gives me some meaning. What do I make of it? Like, maybe it's the wrong meaning. I have no idea to the real access to the real meaning.
To me, then that's another. I would want to have. I think you'd have to. Maybe you could run an experiment. Maybe we could drop in. These materials. Run them through. You're going to have these edit distances. Is that going to correlate with performance on this? I don't see why it should any more than the blue did, because the way this specific test is designed, it's not looking at all of the sentences equally. So, I don't know what it's going to correlate. I think there's a better chance for it to correlate with blue than this. It's elusive. Meaning is elusive. It's a foundational question. What does things mean? What is the meaning of this? And I don't think that's easy to answer. If you can get people to agree on what they did based on what they internalized, that's a first step. I think the thing to think about is what are these experiments going to look like such that progress could be made? If the answer is that it correlates with blue, then that's the possibility that you know what to optimize. And what are the steps along the way to either make an adjustment or to demonstrate how that's going to work? I think that's what's on my mind anyway.
There's an analog of adequacy and fluency in this. I could give you machine translation output and say edit it so that it means something reasonable. But it's not
But see,
then I say, okay, now make it mean the same thing as this.
Yeah.
And so in what they describe, it's not clear to me that they necessarily want. First of all, it's not clear to me that I'll do the same edits for one or the other.
Yeah.
And then on top of
And
that,
it can be biased by the trans.
Yeah,
Maybe you would do a different thing with a different translation, like I think you were saying. What if you had 4 or something like that? Maybe it would be different. Would they be important?
The same guidelines. That was one of the talk last year at the MT meeting.
Yeah.
They got the same guidelines and they were able to produce different results. Then they were getting one against the other 3, and the blue score they were different.
Yeah, that's right.
There was not even agreement between human subjects that
That's
they
right.
were agreeing, and you give them direction.
The difference here is that, in that it's unconstrained. You look at these are translators.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, this is it's an artificial thing. You're looking at the answer and somebody already did the work for you. So that's a strange situation. You already have a translation to look at, and you're supposed to trust that.
Did you conduct the experiment where you take the 4 translations for the blue score and see whether they actually mean the same thing?
Wait, if you did what now?
Well, the blue score is obtained from coincidence with 4 different translations of the Arabic text.
Yeah.
Now the question is, do the 4 different translations actually mean the same thing?
Okay.
Well, that's a question which goes to
How do we answer that? How do we answer that?
I don't know, you'd have to conduct an experiment.
Yeah. One way, maybe this is silly, but would they get the same score on this test? Would that count? If they answered the...
I don't know.
I can answer it anecdotally that in a 1,000-sentence test set, we have found examples where the 4 humans don't mean the same thing. They mean they're off, and sometimes very dramatically.
It's well known. In my experience, the we outsource these, so it's limited maybe to this test, but they do what you ask them to do, and they'll ask you, do you want me to be more faithful to the original, or do you want me to adapt it to you so you can understand it better? It's not just that the words are different; they talk differently, and there's
the way I would conduct this experiment is that I would give some Arabic speaker, the task of constructing these SAT questions.
Okay.
And then I would give blind people the 4 different translations and find out how they answer them. And if they,
we could do
we
that.
would know how good they are in SAT scores, and we'd see.
We could do that. In this case, we had the Arabic experts create the SAT questions, and we would have the mechanics to do that test.
No, I thought you asked how would you find out whether they mean the same thing.
That's
so
right.
It wouldn't be identically that they mean the same thing, but we'd have some kind of a handle on it.
You can measure it, and you can look at the statistical significance. That would be one way that would be serviceable.
Right.
I don't think it answers the deep questions. of what's in people's minds. Jason?
So this is a different question, not related to the previous one. Do other people want to follow up on this line? Okay. So you mentioned this interesting question, I think interesting to a lot of people here. From these kinds of experiments, either these or ones like them, what can people who are doing MT research conclude about how to do better research? So another way of asking the question is, what are the properties of a translation which allow people to answer questions on this test correctly about it? One thing that would help, actually, if you were to run more experiments like this, would be to give different translations from the machine's n-best list to different experimental subjects. So you can say, okay, what are do people do better with this translation or with that translation? Now, maybe that doesn't correlate so well with the BLIS score.
It crossed my mind to do something based on it. We put this in front of people at the PowerPoint level.
Yeah.
Give them the lattice. Or like a slimmed down version of it, and you can pick your way, you can walk your way through that. People are pretty good at that, and you just make it readable enough for them.
Right, I had that question also, but the question I'm asking now is a little bit different. So
yeah, it is. Yeah,
you pull 3 or 4 translations out of the lattice. You make sure that they're substantially different, not just different at one word.
So I started.
And you give each of them to a quarter of the subjects, and then you ask, okay, over all of the questions, could you build a classifier based on some human designed features, which picked out the sentences that picked out the translations that enabled people to answer the questions well and discriminated them from the others? I
think you're asking a lot out of that experiment. I think that's a cool idea. I think you're asking a lot to have it tell you what those features are.
No, I'm not asking that. I'm just asking for you to collect the data, and then linguists can try to find features which discriminate one from the others.
Maybe that. That's really interesting.
And then, because there have been experiments in re-ranking, right? So wouldn't it be nice if we could throw in features into the re-ranker, which don't just improve BLIS score, which also, at least for the samples that you took from the lattice, push the ones that help people answer questions up above the others?
That's a cool idea. My gut feeling is you don't have enough data to do it with this, but because you're going to need it.
Maybe not.
You got we had, there were 18 level 3 documents. Well, just figure ballpark, 30, 20, maybe 100 questions.
100 sentences.
Yeah. I don't know. We can do the back of the envelope later, but it's a cool idea. That's a cool idea.
What I'd really like to know is when does the ranking of translations by how well they enable people to answer questions differ from the blue ranking? Because in places where they differ, that's telling us that we should be throwing something else into our systems in order to help real users.
Yeah, that's a neat idea. Maybe determiner. I'm just picking at a random. What if determiners didn't matter that much?
For example,
but you got determiners right all the time, and it bumped up your blue scores, but it didn't really help.
Sure. So you might want to have blue prime, which ignores determiners.
Something like that. That's a cool idea. Oh yeah, that's neat. Overall, I felt like the experiments you have to have an intuition. You use the experiment to quantify your intuition, but it won't give you the intuition.
Yes, exactly.
Could we learn that? Thanks. Thanks.